Thank you for joining us for You Will Be Found, a mental health roundtable, presented in partnership by Time, Dear Evan Hansen, and Philosophy. To begin this afternoon's conversations, please welcome to the stage the Tony Award-winning producer of Dear Evan Hansen, Stacy Mindich.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. In the 3 years since Dear Evan Hansen has been performing for the public, from Washington, D.C. to off-Broadway to Broadway, I've seen the show hundreds of times. Each night I stand in the back of the theater and find myself watching audiences of all ages and backgrounds watch the show. And each night as they exit the theater, I listen to their conversations, which are remarkably similar. They are Evan. Their son is Evan. Or they were Zoe growing up alongside a challenged sibling. Or they are a single mom or a bewildered mom. And Heidi perfectly nails their mapless daily life. At the back of the Music Box Theater, or at parties or meetings, or sometimes even just literally walking down the street, those of us associated with the show have been approached by fans and friends alike and have heard intimate, deep, dark stories about suicides hidden in family histories and young children stymied by social anxiety or OCD, teenagers with depression, adults who simply can't connect. What we've all learned from having the privilege of bringing Pasek Paul, Levinson, and Greif's beautiful story to the stage is that everyone identifies with Evan, be they young or old, male or female. Everyone has something, and everyone is looking for someone to tell them it's going to be okay. That's how this started. Early on, the show sought out partners in the mental health arena to be part of the extended Dear Evan Hansen family. In the beginning, I simply wanted to list them in our playbill as resources so that audience members impacted by our story would know where to turn. Today, we are proud to partner with the JED Foundation, the Child Mind Institute, Crisis Text Line 741-741, Born This Way, and the Trevor Project. But soon after we were up and running, we all saw the potential to do some good with our story. The actors, writers, and I began receiving letters and emails and tweets and DMs. We were met at the stage door and on the street with personal stories, revelations, complete strangers were asking our Dear Evan Hansen moms for advice. And we had to ask our friends at the JED Foundation for the carefully worded, caring answer for our actors to reply with, which is, by the way, quote, "I'm not a mental health expert, but I do care, and that's why I want you to go to our website and look up who our partners are and contact them." In early marketing meetings, we stayed away from words like suicide and mental health for fear of being known as the suicide musical. Not an incentive to buy a ticket, is it? But once we saw just how the show is affecting people, we realized that some things are more important than marketing messages and talking points, and we quickly embraced our unique ability to impact mental health stigmas. Imagine a Broadway show that could actually work hand in hand with some of the country's foremost experts on mental health and suicide and be a positive influence. And then I was walking through an airport and a cover story on Time magazine caught my eye. Anxiety, Depression, and the Modern Adolescent was a staggeringly poignant and brilliant story that touched on so many of the same issues that our show does. Time writer extraordinaire Susanna Schrubsdorf and I met, and she wrote one of my favorite stories about our musical called Dear Evan Hansen, We've Been Waiting for a Show Like You. But we were both excited about the prospect of collaborating even further, and an idea was born to bring together great minds to talk about mental health in a way that would possibly inspire people to listen and pay attention. Lending the show's name to this effort is a real honor. Philosophy, the beauty company that commits a percentage of all sales to community-based mental illness prevention through its Hope and Grace initiative, tied this all together and made this dream a reality. So here we are, and we couldn't be happier. How are you really? The name of today's symposium could not be more apt. It's the question Heidi Hansen does not ask of her son Evan until it's almost too late. But perhaps with events like this, and increasing attention paid to the important mental health issues of our day, more real-life moms and dads and siblings and friends will ask, "How are you really?" with more frequency, and take the time to hear the answers. Thank you. And now, words really do fail describing this video that Time has created with our dear Evan Hansen actors. So please, let's watch together.
Dear Evan Hansen, thank you for saving my life. I woke up 2 days ago wanting to do something really stupid. I've never felt so understood and cared for.
Social media went from being optional to almost mandatory among teens. Both teens and adults who spend a lot of time on social media are at risk for more mental health issues.
You wouldn't think that a show about teenage suicide and depression and anxiety and social media would combine to make a beautiful Broadway musical, but it has.
Evan Hansen is a senior in high school, and he struggles with anxiety. It's about the need to be seen and understood.
We all struggle with the same feelings of the need to connect, not knowing how to connect. I think things are changing so much in this world so rapidly that we're all trying to figure it out.
Subject, thanks for saving me.
Subject, a small story.
Subject, suicide.
Subject, thank you so much.
Subject, love.
I am not quite sure who this message is going to, but right now I'm just hoping it gets read. I am a senior in high school.
I wanted to thank you for the beautiful and heart-wrenching experience we had seeing Dear Evan Hansen last month.
You know those days when you feel as if you don't really add any value to the world or to the people around you? I feel like that a lot.
I brought our 15-year-old daughter and 13-year-old son to the show. Their older sister died by suicide a little over a year ago. We're still devastated. But it helps us when people talk about mental illness with understanding and compassion.
We were all that kid who felt alone at one point or another, even if we were the most popular or most involved kid at school.
Thank you for teaching me new ways to cope with my, at times, very overwhelming emotions.
Best, a 23-year-old woman who wishes your show had come out when she was in high school.
Sincerely me.
Sincerely me.
Sincerely me.
But really, sincerely, just a kid who loves theater and is a little less sad because of you.
Now I'd like to introduce Time's executive editor and my colleague and friend, Susanna Schrobsdorf.
Hi, everyone. I think you can see by that video why it is so hard to talk about Dear Evan Hansen without getting a little emotional. We are so happy at Time Magazine to have partnered with the cast and the crew and everybody that works with the show, because that show came along exactly at a moment when we were covering a news story that is so important, the epidemic of depression and anxiety amongst teenagers and older people now. It's up 30% since 2013, and amongst teenage girls, it's up 65% in terms of diagnosis of depression. So this musical couldn't be here at a better time because it allows people to talk about it. And that's what we're going to do here today. And then we're going to hear an incredible performance by the cast who are back there watching you all. And to start the program, we thought we'd take a look at Evan Hansen, because no one, in the show, they don't diagnose him, nor do they diagnose Connor, the teenage boy who loses his battle with depression. But everybody who loves someone who has one of these disorders or has these disorders has been curious about what is really going on behind the characters that we're seeing on stage. Not just the two boys, but their parents and their sibling and everybody that is affected by this. So we thought we would talk to a couple of people who are experts, both in psychology and psychiatry, and in the characters in Dear Evan Hansen. So let's welcome, I'm gonna go this way, Dr. Harold Koplowitz, who is the president of the Child Mind Institute, and the Tony Award-winning writer of Dear Evan Hansen, the guy who created all these characters, Stephen Levinson.
Thank you so much. We're so delighted that you guys are here. I'm Stephen.
I'm Harold. I wish I wrote Dear Evan Hansen.
Well, I thought we could start off this conversation by sort of talking about the general idea of anxiety in young people, which is something that you are an expert in. And how prevalent is anxiety today among young people?
So I think people should recognize that mental health disorders are the most common illnesses of childhood and adolescence. So there's 17 million kids, 18 and younger, in the United States who have a mental health disorder. So that means everyone here, everyone watching, knows and loves one of these kids. So if it's not you, if it's not your son or daughter, if it's not, then it's your niece or nephew, excuse me, or it's your best friend's child. And anxiety disorders are the #1 mental health disorder. So 31% of that 17 million, about 5 million or more, are kids who are suffering from an anxiety disorder. And I think it's misplaced, misunderstood, because we're all anxious at times.
Right.
We all have angst. An anxiety disorder causes real distress and dysfunction. It literally makes it difficult to talk to people or to go to school or to be alone or to stop washing one's hands. So these are real disorders that cause distress and dysfunction. They're very common, but the best news is they're very treatable.
That's really interesting.
So how about I'll ask you a question then? What was the initial impulse for the creation of the character of Evan?
Well, it's interesting because when Benj and Justin and I first started talking about this idea for a musical, we definitely did not begin from a diagnostic place. Obviously we began from a dramatic place and from a storytelling perspective. And the way that this story originated, for those who don't know, was that Benj Pasek, one of the songwriters in high school, had a fellow classmate who died of a drug overdose. Whether it was accidental or not wasn't entirely clear. And it was someone who people didn't really know, people weren't really friends with, but in the aftermath of that tragedy, there became this outpouring of grief among the students, and a lot of what even then Benj saw as sort of bending of the truth, like he was actually my friend, or everybody seemed to want to be closer to this tragic figure and to this tragedy. And as time went on, and especially with the advent of social media, all three of us had seen that phenomenon grow of people wanting to be a part of a tragedy that they weren't necessarily. So it began from the question of what makes people, what is behind this phenomenon? And what we sort of landed on was this idea of a desperation to connect, which is what we sort of saw behind all of it, was this powerful urge to connect. And even if that meant not necessarily being honest about it, but somehow finding a community, even if it wasn't true, rather. And when we started talking about connection, we actually said, like, well, what would it mean to have a character who can't connect, who in this world of people so desperate for connection, this is somebody who is as desperate but is unable. And that was actually the beginning of Evan, was starting from the premise of who is this person, why is he so unable to permeate, to break through those barriers that he sees all around him, especially in a world where everybody is connected all the time. Right. And also a character who looks around and sees his peers on social media and sees that everybody else seems so fluent, and why isn't he? And so that was really the basis, and from that kind of spilled out this character.
So you never overtly diagnose him.
Yeah.
And even tell us what he's suffering from. So how do you label it for yourself? How would you think of it?
Well, I'm actually interested to know what you would say first, maybe.
That's all right.
I'll turn the tables.
Well, I can tell you that, excuse me. So in some of the original versions, he looked more and more like he had autistic traits. And certainly people who have autism, whether they have Asperger's or autism, the spectrum, autism spectrum disorder, have trouble socially joining. So they could definitely be people who have trouble connecting.
Right.
The problem was that within 2 years, the show takes place over 2 years, Evan's like a different person at the end when he's walking in the park, and that doesn't disappear. The deficit of social, inability to socially join with people on the spectrum, they can't fix that in 2 years. The other group that really suffers are people who have social anxiety. And social anxiety is when you're pathologically self-conscious. What am I doing with my hands? You're judging me that I'm not speaking properly. I shouldn't hold my hands up like this. And so I'd rather be silent. I literally won't answer a question in school. I won't raise my hand because I might be wrong. And Evan, in my opinion, is like the quintessential character like that. He's tripping over his own feet. He can't talk to Zoe. He gets stuck. And unfortunately, the psychiatrist who created is a very silly person who has him writing letters to himself because, he can write the letter, but when he has to actually practice and be in the real world, he couldn't. So I think that people minimize how severe anxiety disorders are. But if you want to think what it's like to be socially anxious, the next time you go to a party and you're with your partner, your friend, and you don't know anyone, and you walk in and you say, oh, God, I hate this. I'm not wearing the right clothes. I don't like teachers. I don't like lawyers. I don't like this. And the best thing for you is a drink because that actually makes things better. The problem is the next time you'll need a higher dose of drinking. That's what someone who has social anxiety feels, but it's exponentially exaggerated. So they can't even make it to the party. So I think that, and also if you're talking about numbers, there's so many more people who have social anxiety than have autism spectrum
It's an
disorder.
interesting, nobody asked us about that question, is Evan on the spectrum, until really the show kind of took off and more people were seeing it. And it's interesting, this is something that we've talked about, but depending on who's playing that part and the way that they play that part, I think you can read a lot of different things into Evan. And that's something that we're okay with and kind of happy with, because if you can find your way into that character because, it reminds you of this person, reminds you of yourself, and that's great. So we are a little bit deliberately vague in the show about exactly what it is. It's also, I think, a function of none of those characters knows what it is, so none of them would say it. We definitely studied social anxiety and really looked at that, and the idea of Evan constantly apologizing. That's sort of what when I was writing the character, that became a way in for me to understand it, was that everything he did was wrong, and so his brain is running so quickly that he's already said it, realized it was wrong, wants to take it back, and that's kind of the pattern of his thoughts. It's just this endless observing himself, censoring himself.
So what I think is brilliant is that adolescence is a very tough time. By the way, it starts at around 12, and it doesn't end until you're 24.
Wow.
When Hertz lets you rent a car at 25, they have figured out that
That's amazing.
There's a reason why they realize that you'll put your seatbelt on, you'll follow, you have some strategy, you understand cause and effect. A helmet, a condom, a seatbelt, all of that kind of happens at 25. But so adolescence is a very tough time. You feel everything, you're boiling, you're freezing, and when you come home and you tell your mother, it's been the worst day of my life, I wish I was dead, when they minimize it and say, oh, it wasn't so bad, that's not the right answer. The right answer is, what can I do to make it better? Because they really feel that terrible. What I found fascinating is the characters that are not ill. The Zoe, the Jared, the girl, Alana, they really represent the trouble that people have being an adolescent without being psychiatrically ill.
Right.
So for instance, Jared is definitely a nerdy kid. He's not socially high on that totem pole. And boys basically are on a totem pole. The kid who's physically the most mature, the kid who's the best athlete, the jock, he's at the top of the totem pole. And the nerdiest kid is on the bottom.
This all sounds very familiar.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you're somewhere near the bottom and you're moving up and your mother says, why don't you take Evan to the party? You don't have enough endorsements or tokens to drag him up. In fact, you'll be dragged down.
What we always say about Jared is that, everybody, he's the lowest, but there's always at least Evan is lower. Do you know what I mean?
And it actually makes him feel better. And when Evan jumps up. And Alana is this very anxious, A+, brown-nosed kind of kid who we all knew, who's just so insecure without being ill that she has to be, Connor's best friend, or she has to be the president of the club.
Right.
She's building that resume to go to college.
Yes.
And so when you see those characters, it's very easy to remember that you're back in high school, where that cast was
this is also something that's interesting. In writing the show, we started to really feel like all of these characters were struggling to connect in one way or another. And we're struggling with living in a world that does feel increasingly isolating and sort of atomizing, and impossible to navigate for all of these characters. And so do you feel like anxiety disorders and depression, are those things that are increasing partly because of cultural things like smartphones, the internet, Facebook? Where does that fit in?
So there's not enough evidence and enough research to definitively say that. I mean, we all know about FOMO, fear of missing out.
Right.
So there's no doubt that people are living curated lives.
Right.
I mean, no one puts a bad picture on their Instagram feed, but it's I think the way to best think about this is you break up with a girl, and it's awful that you have to see her on Instagram with another guy.
Yes.
It's so much better if she moves to California and you never see her again, right?
Right.
And so all of a sudden we're faced with watching people who have rejected us or we've rejected, and they're still in our lives. And it's very painful when you're a teenager where you feel everything so intensely, okay?
Yes.
I think also that when something bad happens in school in the old days, and someone pushed you or you had a fight with someone, you didn't get it recorded, right? And you didn't have everyone you went to sleepaway camp and everyone and your cousins all see it online somewhere. It was a terrible experience and it was over. So there's no doubt that that makes some of these experiences more intense. I really think the reason why we're seeing more kids with anxiety and depression is that the country is reaching a tipping point. I think we're becoming more open to these things, and it's because treatment works. It's not only that there's a whole slew of medications that came out in the 80s that are very effective. The real breakthrough is in the therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, therapies that you can do in 12 sessions, 15 sessions, where people are significantly better. They're not 100% cured, but they're significantly better, and they can go on and continue lead their lives. They can always come back for tune-ups. And I think when people feel there's hope, they're more likely to raise their hand and say, I'm ready to do this. I think kids experience stigma less than adults. We're doing a campaign now called #MyYoungerSelf. So for the entire month of May, we've asked famous individuals who had a mental health or a learning disorder to give us a childhood photo and a 30 to 60 second video of them talking to their younger self about what they would say. And most of them would say, don't be afraid to ask for help. Treatment works. It will get better. Some of these are so moving that 1 million people view them in 24 hours. And I think it's interesting that while we started this May 1st, and we were on NBC Nightly News and then on the Today Show, on May 3rd, Ryan Reynolds comes out to Carson Daly and says, I really suffered from anxiety as a teenager, and there were dark days. And it's very cool when a great-looking movie star says, I had a tough time too. I think, let's just talk about the parallels you see between Connor and Evan.
Well, that was something that really emerged from working on this show for, we between the time we started writing the show and when it was on Broadway, it was about 5.5 years. So during that time, obviously these characters evolved a lot. And at first, we did not consider Evan and Connor to be similar at all. And partly, I think partly that's your experience as an audience member too. These seem like completely different people. One of them is sort of docile and, sort of clueless, but very sweet to his mother and trying. And one of them seems kind of jerky and like a druggie.
And angry.
Yes. And then I think as we began writing, and I think as the show goes on, you start to feel like, oh, these are two boys that took two different roads, And we've even, when we were, a lot of what you see on stage, there's a lot that doesn't get up there that we know, the backstory and the history of these characters. And we've always said about Connor that he was someone who suffered from anxiety too, and someone who took that anxiety and lashed out. It turned into anger, it turned into violence, and Evan, all of that anger and violence went inward.
And also, Connor starts to self-medicate.
Right,
it's not,
exactly.
Marijuana use is endemic. The high percentages of teenagers use marijuana. That doesn't mean that people are using marijuana every day.
Right.
When Connor's mother says, "I told you not to go to school stoned," he said, "Well, I won't go to school."
Yes.
That's not your typical teenager.
Yes.
So he starts to self-medicate, whether it's just marijuana or more. We don't know, and he starts to isolate also.
And he's someone who, basically what we found powerful in the story as we were exploring it was the idea that ultimately Evan, through this lie and through something that is, in the end, not a good thing that he does, somehow comes out on the other side of that and is able to live with himself. It forces him to come to this reckoning where he has to confront the fact that he doesn't like himself and that he needs help, really. And he goes to his mother, and that's sort of the beginning of the beginning for him. And for Connor, he clearly didn't feel that way, and he didn't get that chance. And so in a way, Evan's story is Connor's story. It's just, it went the other way.
Right, and it's also, it's unclear, by the way, whether Connor committed suicide or if he accidentally overdosed.
Yes.
Because the suicide note is not really a suicide note, right?
Right,
It's
and that's
Evan's
something,
note,
yes.
But that's not atypical. So suicide among teenagers, 5,000 young people this year between 14 and 24 will commit suicide.
Wow.
600,000 will make a serious enough attempt that they will land up in an emergency room. That means every 2.5 minutes, someone is making an attempt. And here's the part that people forget. There are 2 million teenagers who think about suicide.
Right.
It's because of their brains. They're different. Remember, that prefrontal cortex doesn't put on the safety belt, doesn't put a helmet on. They are thinking about it, and therefore, when one suicide happens, they're very susceptible. So you see these clusters happening all the time. So 90% of the kids who commit suicide have a psychiatric disorder, but this is a different type of brain. Teenagers have a different type of brain than children and adults. I think what we forget is that teenagers only see opportunity, they don't see risk. And basically, we always talk about the bad stuff. I have to tell you, the Parkland kids, the Parkland High School kids, they only see opportunity, they don't see risk too, but it's really positive. They're talking into the face of the NRA, or they're talking right back to a US senator. But you have to remember, they feel so passionately, and sometimes if they already are predisposed for anxiety and depression, it can be very deadly.
Got it. That's fascinating. So I guess one of the big questions is, when you watch the show, do you find it a realistic depiction of these things?
Yeah. So first of all, I like the theater. I don't ever remember going to a musical where people were sobbing. And so, and I think they sob because it's so real. I think when those two mothers turn to the audience and say, "Does anyone have a map?"
Yeah.
As someone who's been a child psychiatrist over 30 years, that is what they're asking for.
Right,
How did I get into the situation? This is not what I thought was going to happen. I feel lost. I think also the pain that, the experience that when Connor grabs the his cast, when you see the pain of the parents talking to Evan and he feels like he's obligated to take away their pain, I think that's incredibly realistic. I also think I told you that the other kids they're just so typical of high school kids.
Right.
And the insecurity that we feel, that we're not ourselves yet, we're still developing.
It's interesting because, as dramatic storytellers or as storytellers of any kind, you sort of approach the material from a really kind of a gut response and an instinctual response in a lot of ways. And you don't think about things like, is it realistic or have we diagnosed it correctly? And to be honest, I don't think we realized that people would respond the way that they have.
Like I said to you backstage when I heard how people are sending these emails, I mean, you've accomplished something that very few playwrights can do, that they can touch people like this. I have to tell you that as a parent, when I was watching the scene at the end where the mom says to Evan, things seem so big and they're going to get so small, which is exactly what happens. Teenagers and adolescents feel it's the end of the world, and if they can just wait a little bit, it'll pass. Let's ride the wave. But when she wipes his nose, I thought to myself, only a mother would do that. He's dripping.
Well, and that, I have to say, that is completely a credit to Rachel Bay Jones.
Right. So the actors really did bring something to it.
The actors bring a tremendous amount of their own humanity and their own struggles. And I mean, I think we all go through, if we don't go through exactly these things, we go through similar struggles, obviously. So yeah, we were so blessed from very early on to have these empathic, incredibly smart and...
So, I know you're a dad, but when the guy starts, the father talks about a mitt, and as a metaphor for, what I did wrong and how I should have done it right, and the pain he feels. Every father, I'm a dad too, thinks, oh, I would have liked to redo that. And the good news for parents who are in the audience, you're always allowed to do a redo. The Connor ending is still rare. So most of the time when we make a mistake, we can say we made a mistake, let's do that over
What
again.
we always said about that scene is that's the scene that he should have had with Connor.
Right.
And that's what's so terrible about it, and also there's so much promise, is like, maybe I can start over in a way.
So what was the one thing you wanted most for the audience to experience by seeing the show?
I think ultimately all we're ever trying to do is to get an audience to look on stage and say, oh, that's me. Or in some way, even if it's not, Oedipus Rex, it's still, I understand something human and something universal about that speaks to who I am and speaks to my struggles, and I feel a little less alone. I mean, as cheesy as that sounds, I think all art, that's really what we're looking for.
So as someone who's seen the show several times and listening to these emails being read and this audience, I'm quite convinced you accomplished that.
Oh, thank you so much.
So,
thank you.
The fall entrance. Hi everyone. So our second panel is called How Are You Really? Because even though we are all sharing every single emotion, every single thing we've eaten, and everywhere we've been on social media, when you ask somebody how are they, usually the answer is not exactly the truth. So we are hoping to open up a dialogue and a discussion about how are you really, and why that is such a hard thing to do, because if you can't talk about it, you can't fix it. So to talk about this, I'm so excited to introduce actor and activist Rowan Blanchard. Hi. And the executive director and CEO of the JED Foundation, which works very hard to prevent suicide, John McPhee. and the president of the National Crittenden Foundation, Jeanette Pay Espinoza. The Crittenden Foundation works with girls and women who are under various kinds of stress and hardship. Hi, guys. Hi. So we're going to have a cheerful talk about something very serious. And I guess just to follow up on the question we're asking, how are you really? Maybe you can each talk a little bit about what the barriers are to answering that question honestly. Why is it so hard for people to say when they're in distress or to explain what it is? What is it? Shame? Is it other kinds of stigma? And I don't know, maybe Rowan, do you want to start? Or would you? Yes?
I would love for the adults to start. Because I'm figuring this out.
Okay, yes. All right, so it's up to you two. John, maybe?
Sure. So typically when this question is asked, the answer is often stigma. And I think that's an important word and concept, but that we should unpack it because the barriers to care are many. For some, and classically the way we think of stigma, it's shame, it's prejudice, it's secrecy. But there are also issues related to fear. What does this mean? Uncertainty. How do I get help? Mm-hmm. Will it work? In the case of getting care, not for yourself, but for a friend, right, which is a real opportunity in when someone's in distress, often the barriers relate to not wanting to betray trust. What does it mean to be a good friend? What is loyalty? So there's several things for us to identify and try to address.
And I guess I would add, at National Crittenden, we work specifically with girls and young women. And I think everything that John said for sure, but I think for girls and young women, often there is, power, sense of powerlessness, invisibility, marginalization, and a sense that even if you say it, no one will listen. And so why put yourself in that kind of position to carry the stigma and the shame, as you talked about earlier. So, I think not that that's greater or less stigma than for boys. I think it's just different because we live in this social context where the world is different for boys and girls. So I'm wondering, because I know you've talked about it, what kind of advice would you give to girls who are kind of holding back but really would like to share?
I sort of experienced the same thing, I guess. We grew up into this world where empowerment was the goal and happiness was the goal. Mm-hmm. So when people ask us how we are, you just want to answer in the way that you think sells best or the way that is most appropriate. Because especially for girls, but that goes further, people who are not white, people who are queer, there's so much stigma to be happier or to be more secure in your identity, and there's less room to talk about how you actually feel because that's always downplayed as being something that makes you less than or makes you weaker. When I've always thought that vulnerability and sadness and all of these things that we don't really talk about actually inversely make you stronger in this weird way, because it kind of makes you more aware, I guess, and it shows that you let things affect you more. So I don't know, I guess for me, I still have a hard time answering the question, how are you really? Because you want to let people know that you are stable and secure, but at the same time, there are things that you want to talk about. But I think that so much of that pressure comes from having to sell happiness and having to sell empowerment as something that deems you as a smart person or as a happy person.
Right. It's interesting you mentioned female empowerment because there is a lot of pressure or a lot of people going online going, I'm great just the way I am, or I'm great without makeup, and we know not everybody believes that. And I think you helped a lot, Rowan, when you wrote an incredible, not Instagram post, I guess it was an essay attached to an Instagram post a couple of years ago about how you were feeling. What kind of a reaction did you get when you put that up?
So I basically posted this thing, I think it was at the end of 2016 or maybe at the end of 2015, where I sort of talked about my year in review and how I was struggling with depression, among other things. But the thing that kind of got picked up was that Rowan Blanchard, 14 years old, is depressed. I was like, oh. But it was, I guess the thing that was really interesting is that I grew up on the internet. I always had access to Tumblr, to Twitter, to Instagram. And talking about your feelings wasn't something that was shocking. We were constantly making memes about being sad, or it just never was something that I found out of the ordinary to talk about. And when I posted that, it sort of made me aware that adults are so shocked by teenage sadness because we don't get to tell adults directly about it. We just tell each other. Because I always told my friends how I felt, and then, you know, my parents like realized that I was sad based on what I was posting, which was really interesting. I don't know, it was more a reflection to me of how this conversation between generations really hasn't been given space to talk about how being sad and it is something that we haven't necessarily been hiding. It's just something we've been telling each other, not those who are older, or our parents, or our family members, or teachers.
Well, it's funny because there's a Seattle Children's did a study on Instagram hashtags and secret hashtags, and there are all kinds of secret ways that, not secret, but ways that adults would not find to tag things, and for how people search for things. And a little bit in some of the reporting we've done, the virtual world being as real as it is for your generation, and parents are living outside of that. So you're right, we can't find you. We can't come and find out how you are. How would you, maybe you can each take this question, how do parents break that barrier? And in Dear Evan Hansen, as you know, the mom has a very hard time talking to Evan, getting through. I'll start with you, Rowan. What's the best way for an adult to actually ask that question properly?
Well, I think part of the reason why teenagers are actually so afraid to talk about their sadness or about their depression or whatever they may be facing is because they're really terrified of it being reduced to angst, or to just being your age, or like you'll get through it. When like genuinely, when you are a teenager, part of the reason everything literally feels so intense is because you haven't gone through it before. So you have no like survivor toolbox of like how to get through this situation, how to get through that. You were kind of just thrown into this world, and especially growing up in this world today, or growing up in the world that Evan Hansen is like growing up in, like Trump's president. There's so many things that you like, you know what I'm saying? But it's like you can't. There is so much more pressure on teenagers right now. It feels like because adults don't necessarily have all the answers.
Right.
Like we didn't elect him, so it's like this really, you know what I'm saying? No, I'm just saying it's like this really interesting thing that I've had to talk about with so many of my friends, where it's like we're taught our entire lives like go to adults. Like when you're an adult, you'll know what to do. Ask an adult, tell an adult, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, y'all don't really know what to do.
We're discovered.
Okay. I guess for me, it's what's been really helpful for me and my family is just to kind of have a frank conversation about how I'm very genuine about how I feel. They answer, and they have shifted their response in a way where they realize that I really am going through everything for the first time, and that this is a really unique world to grow up in this second.
Absolutely, I think it's true, and part of that unique world, and maybe we heard a little bit in the last panel about that, but maybe you can answer that question too, and Jeanette too.
Yeah.
How do you say how are you without alienating somebody?
Well, I think one of the things I wanted to comment about the online thing. I think part of it, I think you're right. I think it is on us as adults, because I think it's so easy for us to say that these online relationships are secondary, right? I don't think that's true for young people. And I think that there's also an assumption that because all the communication is virtual, you know, there's not a sense of empathy or compassion. Right. And I actually don't agree with that, but I know that most of the folks in my age group, which is 60-ish, disagree with me. I think that actually, in fact, it has increased compassion and empathy, because I think now the opportunity to really see what other people different from yourselves are experiencing in real time every day actually increases the quotient. But I think what you're saying is true, but we don't have answers for that.
Right.
So you see it, you feel it, you know, you can taste it, you can smell it. But we're doing this time of life for the first time too.
Right.
And so I don't think we know the answers, because we didn't have those kinds of relationships.
I think that's part of it furthering, though, is acknowledging from both parties on both ends that you both don't know the answers.
Right.
That's always been helpful for me, is when like my parents are like, I actually don't know how to like get you through this, but we can just talk about it, and maybe that will make you feel better, or maybe you can call a friend. There's something about normalizing it in this way where it's not, there's not a yes or no or direct way out of it that I think has always made me feel more relieved.
Yeah, and so I would say to older adults or to the parents in the room, I think one place to start is to check our legacy stigma, right? Because we as older adults are carrying more of those barriers than Rowan's generation, who are much more willing to talk about these issues. And so we need to drop that legacy stigma and meet them where they are. Exactly as Rowan said, we know that connectedness is protective, connectedness to others. And so meeting young people not with answers, but with conversation and understanding and empathy and creating that kind of connectedness is very important. And mental health advocacy groups like the JED Foundation, it's funny to listen to your comments because we tell young people, find a trusted adult, right? Tell a trusted adult. And so what is a trusted adult? How do you, act and behave as a trusted adult? And I think, just without judgment and with caring and earnesty and listening and all of those things. And I'll just wrap your question. How do you say, are you okay, or check in with someone? If you have a gut feeling that something's wrong with someone else, believe your gut, act upon it. You're probably right. You're not going to do any harm. And if you're earnest and you care, you can't mess it up. Just ask if the other person's okay and let them know you're there to listen and to help.
How about timing? Because I think that timing on when you ask that question, I've noticed that I particularly ask it exactly at the wrong time of my children. No matter what happens, it's exactly the wrong moment. And so I have not yet figured this out. So I don't know, what's the right time? Is there can you give us a signal, guys? Because we don't know. We don't know what to say.
I mean, I'm your kid right now. Yeah, my mom's right there. She's like, every single time you ask me is not the right time either. Y'all?
So the same thing happens, right, to you? That people come up to you and it's exactly when you don't want to talk about this.
Well, I think I think especially with parents, it can be deemed as embarrassing, and we're not used to really talking about our feelings in a way where we feel actually believed. It's like what you were saying, where girls are scared to say their feelings, partially because what if nobody actually believes them? And I think we're so accustomed and ingrained to believe that adults are talking down to us, that it's hard for us to accept conversations into our lives that could actually be opening in other ways.
I think the challenge maybe is once you say, do you want to talk about it? And then they say no, you have to walk away.
Right.
And that's the hard part.
Right. It is the hard part. And I think one of the things that moved me most in watching the Dear Evan Hansen was watching Heidi, Evan's mom, keep trying, and they were just missed opportunities. She had to work, and people don't often talk about this as much, which is that parents are online all the time. They're distracted. They're constantly on their phone. I know that I am answering emails, and everybody's workday has shifted to kind of every day all the time because of our phones. So we are not as aware of what you guys are feeling because we're not observing, and I'm sure maybe that would be professional advice. I should go to you, John. Is that professional advice, like observe better your children?
Yeah, there are a lot of signs that can be noticed, and it is true that parents are often anxious and worried and have their own concerns. I'd go back again to the simple concept of if you have a gut feel, even if it's fleeting, believe it, trust it, follow it.
So what about media? People talk a lot about how it's wrecking everything. And you said a little bit about social connections being good. But what about other media that we see, the shows that you're in, Rowan, or performances like at Dear Evan Hansen? And where's the line between exploiting some of these issues? I know people were very upset about 13 Reasons Why and the way it portrayed suicide. So there's a lot of back and forth about how to actually talk about these things in media. And maybe, what do you think? Where are we? Are we doing this right, Jeanette, or are we messing it up somehow?
Oh, I don't know. You referred to it earlier, but the times are so chaotic. I think the struggle to find any kind of balance in what you feel or what you see or what you hear is a huge challenge. So, I mean, I always would say that we're better off putting more out there than less, particularly as people are searching for some kind of stability or anchor to kind of find their way through where they are right now. I don't know that there's a good way. I do think that the fact that we have how many channels, if you're just talking about TV or Netflix, the reality now that you can watch only what supports your point of view is a challenge for us. Whereas in the past, way, way, way back, there were so many fewer channels. There was some kind of common
You mean
sense of
2012 or
social
so,
grounding.
like way back?
2012. Yeah, plus
old
a little.
days, the old days.
So I don't know the right answer to that
Yeah,
because I think
yeah.
we're in such, even just if you think about the last 2 years, the environment has changed so dramatically in terms of the media.
Media also can be very stressful.
Yes.
If you certainly watch the news, and I know you think about that a little bit, John, John, because of Jed's role in preparing young people for college and preparing them to go to the next step, and there's so much pressure on them to do well, to get into college, to do all those things.
Yeah, no, that's true. On the media question, I would say, first, it's great that the arts and media are showcasing and talking about mental health in a way that hasn't happened before, and shows like Dear Evan Hansen are doing it beautifully. There are some watch-outs, though. So Harold talked earlier about suicide clusters and the fact that, in the right unfortunate circumstances, suicide can be contagious. So it is important that those in the media and the arts understand safe messaging guidelines. They understand how to think about how the content might affect somebody who's vulnerable and already thinking about suicide. And there's a lot of evidence and know-how around that. It's important that artists and content creators know that and are mindful of that. And that stories need to be authentic and they need to be real, but to also showcase that it is true that people get better, people recover, treatments work, and those might be long roads, but there are many reasons to be optimistic and hopeful and for that to come through. And there are a few adults in the mix who
know what they're doing.
Who know what they're doing, or at least will meet young people right with
I'm not saying like, oh,
no.
You'll be publishing a list of them after the show.
To tie the point is that in the arts and the media, I think it's good to and important to showcase that, to show that when you do reach out, often the help is helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, you've done some great work on television. Does any of it feel like it connects in the way that we're talking about to the way people are feeling? So Girl Meets World was something that really resonated with young girls.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question to answer because I, as an actress and as a consumer, I can't always look to TV to represent things like mental health in the way that I fully want it to.
Right.
And I think with things like reflections in media, you can't. I think it would be a mistake to give media all the responsibility of explaining mental health to us. You know what I know that things that I've been in, there's things that I've looked back on in episodes of Girl Meets World where I'm like, oh, we could have handled that better. But at the same time, I'm not sure if it was our entire responsibility to educate people about things like that. So I wonder about where the dividend is between. I think my parrot went out. I wonder what the line is between how we talk about mental health on screen and how much responsibility we actually give platforms to hold it to.
Yeah. And Stephen Levinson is a rare person to be able to write about these topics in a way that he did. I think he wasn't saying, oh, I better be responsible. I think he was writing something incredibly real, but somehow he did it without pushing the buttons that can be triggering for some people. Do you know what I mean? Your foundation deals a lot with young women and young girls, and then the numbers of girls are so much bigger than boys who are suffering from depression and anxiety. Can you talk a little bit about why that is? Why are girls in worse shape when you look at the statistics?
Well, in worse shape, yeah. I mean, definitely the numbers are higher. I think, again, it goes to our social and political context, right, and power. And I think, you see early sexualization of girls, objectification, combine that with invisibility and lack of power, and just the struggle for identity and safety. And I also think this goes way, way, way back, but I think we have we're very dualistic, and there's a sense, particularly for young girls and teen girls, is that you don't want to be seen as a bad girl, because once you're a bad girl, you're always a bad girl. However, if you're a young man, boys will be boys. So there's this, we don't talk about it a lot, but it's still very present and very ingrained in society that, bad girls are bad girls. You don't marry them, you don't take them home, you don't, whatever, right? And I think that pressure is tremendous. I think you add on top of that caregiving responsibility, girls taking care of their siblings. I think across the age span, women carry that burden. And I think it just creates a lot of sense of responsibility, expectations, and perhaps impossible expectations that lead to that anxiety and depression.
It's interesting you talk about the over-sexualization, because at the same time that Rowan's talking about, empowerment and, feminism, we're still seeing an incredible level of sexualization of girls in the media that we're watching.
Sure.
And do you think that makes a difference in how girls feel? Rowan, or is that not on your radar?
No, of course, but we're talking about things that are so deeply ingrained in society that it comes as no shock to me that girls are sad.
Exactly.
And it's so interesting to me when people are surprised that girls are sad, or that people who are historically marginalized are sad. Exactly. Sexualization is something I've had on my mind since I was 9 years old. It's something that's deep, deep, deep in our brains. And of course, that is a reflection of the media, but it's also it's the media reflecting the things that are so deeply ingrained in our society otherwise.
Exactly.
So I think when we're talking about things like mental health and like things like sadness, we have to talk about how it affects different people differently, because some things are actually systematic, and it's just natural for us to be sad about it.
Right.
So yeah.
Right, oppression is pretty sad.
Oppression's pretty sad. Oppression is pretty sad.
Not much upside to it.
There's not.
It's depressing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like if you, I think when you really study like some of the saddest people are the people who are the most marginalized in this country, and I don't know why that would come as a surprise when they're just reacting naturally to the things that they are historically put up against.
Yeah, I think, most of the girls that Crittenden works with are in foster care, juvenile justice, homeless, they're trafficking survivors. And they will often say, I'm really angry.
Yeah.
And I would say, I would be angry too. There's nothing wrong with your anger. And I also think, there is clinical depression, but there is also just folks who live with complex trauma for their entire lives, or adversity, acute and chronic, and they never are diagnosable because they are survivors and they adapt. And I think that we forget that sometimes, that there is resilience under all of that, in the face of that. But yeah, I completely agree with you. In fact, Dr. Vincent Felitti, for those of you who are familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, he said in a large lecture hall one day, talking about the numbers of women who were depressed compared to men, and he said, maybe it's time to start looking at depression as actually a normal reaction to abnormal situations, which I think is kind of what you're talking about.
That is fascinating, because to say, yes, of course you're depressed, this is completely a legitimate feeling, is something we don't hear very often at all.
I think that takes relief off of someone when you tell them, oh yeah, the reason why you're sad is because historically you have been like marginalized and oppressed. And I think for some people, access to knowing that in this country is so skewed. So once you tell somebody, well, the reason why you might be sad is because of this, then they feel less alone or something.
Right. Or less flawed, like it's something
less
internal.
flawed, or it's less internal. It's actually just something that was inflicted upon them, rather than something they developed themselves.
And I noticed, I think in that post that you wrote, you talked about how you came to the understanding that some days you're sad and some days you're not, and that these two things can exist in the same person almost on the same day and time.
Well, yeah, I think another thing I was taught from so early was that once you're happy, you're just happy. It's just something you've attained and that you have, and you're just happy. You're a happy person.
Yeah.
And one thing that I actually did discover through watching some of my favorite movies and through watching TVs, it was that you could actually have sadness and happiness and just whateverness all exist in one sort of pool of emotion. Like you didn't have to pick and you didn't have to choose. And yeah, that took a relief off of me too, because I was like, oh, I don't have to try to be like happy for the rest of my life. I can just be.
It's not a switch.
Yeah.
Although the Europeans already knew all this, it's the Americans. The Americans who think we're going to attain happiness as some kind of nirvana and stay there for good, right? John, do you have any thoughts on like?
I agree with really with everything that's been said on the subject.
How about making art? You make art. You do things. Can we talk a little bit about the things that we can get or do when we are sad that do not cost money? Because one of the things that we saw was that only 20% of kids who are depressed or have anxiety actually get any treatment. And if you've ever tried to get, book a psychologist on your insurance and get a child there and get back, it's a nightmare. So a lot of people don't get treatment. What can we do beyond professional help?
Yeah. Well, self-care is very important, and I know that's something that you talk about. So getting out, getting active, being with people, again, connectedness, and being with other people, that sense of belonging. So it's a lift if you're really depressed, of course, and you're very sad to do that, to find the agency to do that. But if you can, it's very helpful. And when you're in a place where you're experiencing both happy and sad at the same time, or you're in perhaps not a more deeply depressed state, getting that self-care routine is very, very important. But we also at JED, we have a close eye on everyone who's around the person who might be in distress, right? And that's a really important part of this. When we talk about young people, the data, the research show exactly what Rowan said, that 3/4 of young people who are experiencing some distress share it with a friend. And so, let's, as that caring community, reach out to people, create those connections, ask if you're okay, et cetera. And that can be a big, big part of the answer to your question.
And are schools doing enough? In New York City, our First Lady of the city has tried to put a therapist in every school, which I think is important. But what else should schools be doing to help? And I don't even know if you may not be in school in a regular.
I'm not in regular school, but I'm still in
You're
school.
I mean, in a big high school, right? What do you think we should be doing?
Well, so at the JED Foundation, we work with schools on this very question, and schools can do a lot more, no question. And quickly, I'll say New York City and First Lady Charlene McRae is a real champion, and she's doing really great things. But it starts with this. The mission of the school needs to include student well-being and mental health. And that has to be a priority, a top 3 priority, right? And it needs to be not something that's assigned to the mental health professionals, if there are mental health professionals, but is assigned as a responsibility to everyone in that school. There can be no wrong door, right, if a student goes to someone. And so there are comprehensive approaches and sort of blueprints for how schools can do this. What needs to happen, though, is that the leadership saying and doing what I just said, and then putting a team in place and creating an annual plan around this, like you would for anything that you wanted to accomplish. You'd have a plan. And every school should have that and be working on it all the time.
I agree with everything you said. I think you're starting to see schools add mindfulness to the day and try to bring art back in. So I think we're getting there. I think disciplinary practices are getting revised to be more trauma-informed. But I think there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go.
And the fund, it's a lot heavily dependent on funding and who's making the decisions in your state, I guess I wanted to ask, what's next? If this many kids are depressed, as we've heard earlier, I think 17 million, where are we going next? Is this awareness going to bring us to something good? Or are we just going to talk about it and not be able to do much more?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah. Well, short.
I think it is going to bring us to something good slowly. So our attitudes and behaviors are changing first, and the conversations are happening. But we have deep structural problems in our country. We don't have enough mental health clinicians. We don't have access to care. We have insurance barriers. And so there are a lot of people in distress who are struggling. And as we get, or more of them feel comfortable asking for help, the help isn't always there, right? And that's going to take a long time, and that's going to take a lot of money and political will, and it's going to take everyone to just absolutely insist that we do that as a nation. And when all of that is done, I am very optimistic about the future.
Do you think this is another thing we're going to have to wait for Rowan's generation to be empowered to fix? I think it's on you guys. I'm sorry. Yep. Just kidding. We were talking about the Parkland kids, and they were saying, well, just let us take over, because clearly, they are.
Yeah, but we need some help right now. I need
Indeed.
y'all to change some stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's on us. It's on us. I think we want to take some questions, and I'd like to bring back out Dr. Koplowitz and Stephen Levinson, and we can get some chairs. Yes. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I know we have mics somewhere, there and there. So if anybody has any questions for anybody on the panel, now's the time. Let me see. No questions. I cannot see. You can stand up.
So when I was really depressed, I spent a lot of time in my room alone. And so I had two questions. How is that experience now when it's so easy through your device to leave your room? Do you think that exacerbates the problem or not? And if so, how do you extract people from the room?
Who would you like to answer that?
You want me to start?
Yeah,
okay.
you can start.
So quite clearly, I think it's easier to stay in your room because the world can come to your room. And when we talked about media and we talked about social media, or videos, we have a whole bunch of people who live a life playing games with people they don't know. And it becomes easier, especially if you're uncomfortable and you're anxious and you're feeling a lack of energy or more irritability. And yet, it's really important to get the person out of the room. And the reason to get them out of the room is their sleep starts to get disturbed. They sleep during the day, they don't sleep at night. And so it's not easy to be a parent of a depressed teenager, because I think the big difference is that when you're an adult and you get depressed, you become sad, you stop eating, you can't concentrate, you're not interested in sex, you're not interested in anything, you don't want to do anything. And when you're a teenager who gets depressed, you are irritable, you still will act, you still have sex, you'll still overeat, you'll oversleep, but you will isolate. And being alone is, the thoughts are bad for you. You know, you keep having self-defeating thoughts. So I think getting someone out of the room, even to take a walk, even to break the cycle, is really important. Do you have? No? Okay.
I can not
Right
see
over there.
any of you. Right down here.
Hi. You just said take a walk. And I have two daughters, and I always have found since they were little that when there's a certain attitude, moving even from a room to another room, but especially getting outdoors matters.
Right.
And I'd love to hear from some of the professionals in response in terms of the role of nature and getting outside and unplugging and what people can do to try. I know there's organizations that do this with young people, but some suggestions for lay people would be wonderful.
So the whole concept of the psychotherapy that works for depression, that has real evidence, is something called cognitive behavioral therapy. So the way we think affects the way we behave, which affects the way we feel. So I'm just a worthless person, no one wants to be with me, I have no energy, I'm going to stay in my room, I feel awful, it's just. And if you can break that cycle, if the behavior changes, which is, let's just go for a walk. Do you mean not a jog, just a walk? With that behavior now, we have a little more energy. If we could jog, we might even get some beta endorphins. Because one of the things that happens when you're depressed is you have something called cognitive distortions. You actually believe your bad thoughts. So there's a lot of evidence that, first of all, the sun is actually good for you. It resets your clock. And exercise, if you're not depressed, exercise may actually be a good prevention against depression, that cardiovascular, getting more oxygen to your brain. It's actually good also for your memory, for anyone over 40. 20 minutes of cardiovascular exercise, a little sweat, will keep off that bad memory, the loss of memory cells.
I'd like to know the bribe that gets people out of their room. What is it?
Nowadays, in today's world, unplugging is a really healthy thing to do, and just taking a break from the news cycle and all of that. Unplugging in two ways, from digital and social media, but also from the news, starting there and just taking a break from that.
We have a question over here, I think.
And I was just going to add really quickly saying, we don't have to talk, but let's go for a walk.
Yes, that's very good.
Because it may be that they don't want to walk because they don't want to be isolated and have to talk to you. But
because they're afraid also of that interrogation.
Exactly.
I think there might have been a miscommunication, or maybe I misunderstood. But as a typical Jewish mother, if my kid said to me, "Leave me alone," that would be the last thing I would do. I would just keep harping on them. I wouldn't leave them alone. And I would think that that's the right thing to do.
Well, I think you brought that up before, that once you ask and someone says, no, I don't want to talk about it, you do have to be respectful of that. That doesn't mean you don't have to be concerned.
Exactly.
And that doesn't mean you don't go back and ask again, but not immediately. And so, because otherwise it does feel like harping, and it does feel like interrogation. And remember, there.
I'm guessing you should wait longer than you think. Just a guess.
Well, I think, first of all, nothing bad is going to happen while the kid's in the house. And remember what I said before about adolescents. They really feel things much more intensely than adults do. And so when someone says, I feel absolutely awful, I hate you, you know, believe them. They really hate you for the moment. Let it pass. You know, the other treatment, by the way, that's very popular now is called dialectical behavioral therapy, which is kind of Zen Buddhism meets cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the things you try to teach kids is you feel absolutely awful. I believe you feel absolutely awful. Let's ride the wave, because 10 seconds ago or 30 seconds ago or 60 seconds ago, you didn't feel this bad. We'll ride the wave until you feel better. And that doesn't mean we're going to harp on it. We're just going to be supportive. We're going to be with you. I'll check in with you later. Because otherwise, it's like a terrible dance. It's it becomes part of the problem.
Acknowledge what they feel.
And
say you feel bad. We'll wait it out.
right, and I can come back.
Or you might suggest they do something you know they really like listen to music or write poetry or whatever it is that you know that helps them to take a breath.
Susanna, we have one over here. Up there.
Hi. So sometimes when I'm going through things and I'm just really stressed and I have so much things on my mind. I have work, I have school, I have all these things, one on top of another. Some people be like, oh, it's okay, you're gonna get through it, and I know what you mean. People say you're gonna get through it, and at that moment you're just like, no, I'm not. You don't understand what I'm going through because you're not going through, through it. You're not in my shoes, and you see things through a different perspective. So sometimes, after I feel all this overwhelmed emotions, and I do end up going to school, and I do go to work, and then I come out of work, and then it's the same routine over and over and over. You get tired, but then, yeah, there's your parent, and then they always try to talk to you, and you at the moment, as a child, you'll be like, I don't want to talk to you, but then there's always that moment that you finally do open up, and I feel like those conversations are the best conversations. So sometimes I feel like a parent, instead of saying, oh, you're gonna get you're gonna get through it, I feel like they should be more supportive. So I don't know, what do you feel on that? How would you instead of saying oh, you're gonna get through it, what would be another way?
I think the best thing to say is, what can I do to make it better? Is there something I can do to help you? Because if you say you're going to get through it, it kind of minimizes your experience, because you really are feeling awful, and without meaning to, the parent's uncomfortable. The parent doesn't like you being upset. I can trust me that everyone up here who is a parent is as happy as their least happy child and is worried about their child. So they would like that bad feeling to go away. That shouldn't, you can't wish it away. So I think the best thing you can say as a parent is there something I can do to be helppful? What can I do? Something else?
Well, I'll just add on two parents, being a parent of a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old myself, that it's hard, right? Because you do get worried, you are nervous, but we have to try hard not to be so anxious ourselves that our anxiety is contagious, right? We need to try to be a calmer and provide some solidity and stability in this crazy world, which we've already referenced.
As established before.
Yeah.
We have a question up there.
The biggest challenge within my school community is that kids are telling each other, but then they are not sharing that information because of something you said earlier around betraying trust. So how do you take the step to inform them to make those choices and support each other by telling people who can help them?
Was that
Well, I'll start. I'll start, and then Rowan, I'm interested in your feelings. So we at the JED Foundation, we've done a lot of research on this question and issue, and we found that almost every teen or young adult has been in a situation where they know a friend is in distress, and they're sharing that information exactly as you say, and they're working hard to be there for their friends. But when the situations get high stakes, that you really know, a young person really knows their friend is in trouble, very often they don't go get outside help for these reasons. Again, uncertainty, they don't want anyone to get in trouble. We've seen situations on college campuses where roommates or suitemates or friends are drinking and drugging really out of control, and a number of kids are worried about them, but they think their friend is going to get thrown out of school, and they don't go get outside help. I think this is something that we all have to work on, and we're working on it through education and campaigns. And really, I'm going to pass it to Rowan because I think it's for her generation. We've got to normalize, or this idea that there's a time where you have to go get outside help, and that's what being a good friend is in that situation, as difficult as it might be.
Yeah, I was actually going through this recently where one of my friends is struggling really intensely with depression, and one of her friends was texting me, oh my God, this person is struggling so badly with depression, I don't know what to do, like I'm really terrified of where this could go. And I understood the hesitation to tell an adult, because I think something that we aren't talking about is that there is a certain level of embarrassment when you're a teenager, when you have to admit to an adult that you are feeling in a way that's so heavy, and you know that you might get through it, and you know that the time may pass, but there's still that embarrassment of, in this moment, I can't see that. And so I think one thing that we ended up doing when I talked to my friend about this was we sort of decided that we put ourselves out there to this person who's going through it, and was like, if you literally need to call me in the middle of the night, like, we're here. I think there's something about making yourself available to your friends that does something, but when it does get to the level where a person, like an advisory person, needs to become involved, we both sort of agreed that we would kind of disregard that person for a second and take it to the next level if that did save the other person. So I do think it's subjective and it's complicated, but I think one of the main things is about why we don't go to adults immediately is because there is a huge level of embarrassment. And there's a level of not being believed, and of feeling like, as she was saying, that our feelings might be suppressed in this way where it's like, you'll get through this eventually or something like that. And so I think when it feels so intensely in the moment, it's hard to believe that adults would understand how you are feeling. So maybe that level of empathy could be raised, and that could help improve the situation.
Well, I know that we want to hear the cast come out and sing, and I think what Rowan said is a perfect place to end this question period, because it mainly puts it back on us adults to make sure that our kids know that they shouldn't be embarrassed, and that this is not a stigma. So thank you guys so much for the questions. Thank you all. You guys are incredible. Keep hitting my mic. I think, Jeanette, we're going to bring you back up. Hi. I'd like to welcome Global Senior Vice President Marie-Pierre Stark-Flora. And you all know Jeanette, and I will leave it to them to introduce the next video.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm very, very happy to be here, and I know that all the members of the philosophy team are very proud and very honored to be part of such an important event. Philosophy was created in 1996 because our founder understood that a woman's state of physical health and beauty is directly linked to her state of mental health. And that's the reason why at Philosophy, what is the most important thing for us is to create products that not only deliver benefits, but also deliver a higher purpose and give back to the community. We always say that at Philosophy, we impact women's lives in 3 different ways: by making them look good, feel good, and do good. And I'm pleased to share that since 2014, Philosophy, together with the Hope and Grace Initiative, have donated over $4.5 million to 76 organizations that are community-based and focused on mental health, that help women and their families, touching the life of 1.2 million women. So Jeanette, do you want to say a few words?
Great. Hello again. So as a member of the Hope and Grace Initiative Advisory Board, I'm pleased to share with you this public service announcement that was developed with an introduction from Taylor Trench. And just to say before you see it, just remember one word can make a difference.
Hi, I'm Taylor Trench, and I currently play the title role in Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway. In the show, Evan is a lonely teenager who feels disconnected and anxious, something many people around the world can identify with. As May is Mental Health Awareness Month, we are partnering with Philosophy's Hope and Grace initiative to help end the stigma surrounding mental illness. Please check out this PSA, and remember, the next time you greet someone, one little word can make a huge difference.
Hey! Good. Good, thanks.
I'm well, thank you.
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
It's a beautiful day. I'm totally great.
Am I really?
Oh gosh.
Anxious, maybe? Stressed?
I worry that I'm not working hard enough.
I feel guilty.
I feel that I'm expected to be a certain person.
I'm trying not to drink right now. I find myself censoring what I say.
I'm gonna go follow my dreams. I'm gonna do what I wanna do.
You start dating someone. My mother, she's not very supportive of it. It was hard for me to hear that she's not happy for me.
My dad is in remission, so that's like huge weight has been lifted.
I recently became a widow. I'm beginning to miss my husband as he was before he had a stroke. That was hard.
Fear of the unknown, that can bring me down.
My mom is 87 years old. I was supposed to go there to date, but I just couldn't bear the thought of getting on another airplane. And she's sitting there by herself, and I'm walking around New York. You know, it's hard.
Yeah, it is hard not to drink, but I'm trying right now. I mean, the only reason I got my hair cut today was because the sign said free Prosecco. And then I was like, a water, please. Yeah.
I feel great. I feel a little better just talking to you guys, so.
I just had the greatest experience.
I feel calm and confident. These are thoughts that I guess I wouldn't have thought I was even thinking or holding on to, and it's kind of nice to let them go.
Thank you.
I'm enjoying talking to you.
Ask someone, how are you really? The Hope and Grace Initiative supports the movement to end stigma for those with mental health issues. Give hope with an act of grace and turn this greeting into a whole new conversation.
I am thrilled to recognize 5 remarkable organizations that work day in and day out to help those affected by mental health issues. Those 5 organizations are the National Crittenden, Child Mind Institute, Crisis Text Hotline, the JED Foundation, and the Trevor Project. And they're all committed to helping those affected by mental health. In honor of their work, Philosophy and the Hope and Grace Initiative are pleased to donate $10,000 to each one of those organizations to support their mission. Thank you.
That was fantastic. We want to thank Philosophy for being so generous with their donation to these organizations that we know do so much good. And now, without further ado, I would like to welcome the incredible, the amazing cast of Dear Evan Hansen to sing you a song.
Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? Well, let that lonely feeling wash away. Maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay. 'Cause when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach out your hand. And oh, someone will come running, and I know they'll take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. Lift your head and look around. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found.
There's a place where we don't have to feel unknown. And every time that you call out, you're a little less alone.
If you only say the word,
From across the silence, your voice is heard.
oh, someone will come running. Oh, to take you home. Someone will come running to take you home. Take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. If you only look around, you will be found. You will be found. Out of the shadows, the morning is breaking, and all is new. All is new. a little emotional sometimes, isn't it? We're getting kids crying. All right.
Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome Stacey Minich back up on the stage and thank you all for being here today, for paying attention to these issues, and for this amazing, amazing cast.
Cheers.